So this is the lessons that we'll be looking at over the next 12 weeks of Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah, four of what we refer to as the minor prophets. But studying the Old Testament prophets is something that will be of great value to every Christian. As Paul wrote in Romans chapter 15 and verse 4, "For whatever was written in former days was written for our instruction, that by steadfastness and by the encouragement of the scriptures we might have hope." So Paul is referring there to the scriptures, what we would know of as the Old Testament, and telling us that these things have been written for us, for our instruction, and that through these writings we can find encouragement and we can have hope. The importance of prophecy in the Old Testament is reflected in the proportion of scripture that is prophetic in nature. About 1/3 of the Old Testament is made up of books of prophecy, and we find prophecies in other passages of scripture as well, in the historical books and in the poetical books as well. We find prophecies in those. So it's not confined to those books that we refer to as the books of prophecy, but indeed throughout the Old Testament. And prophecy and the prophets was, as we find in the Old Testament, was God's way of communicating with his people at that time. As the writer to the Hebrews reminds us at the beginning of his letter, in many and various ways God spoke of old to our fathers by the prophets. The prophets may be divided into the writing and the non-writing prophets. And when we speak here of the non-writing prophets, we don't mean that they never wrote anything, but rather that they're prophets who do not have books that are named after them. But some of their writing, some of their words are recorded in say, the historical books of the Old Testament. And those non-writing prophets would include people such as Nathan and Gad, who were working in the time of David, Elijah and Elisha, and some of the women prophets as well, such as Miriam, Deborah and Huldah, who are all referred to as prophets. So their messages are not put into a book form. We don't have a book of Nathan or a book of Gad, but we do find their work and their words being recorded in the historical books there in the Old Testament. The writing prophets are those whose messages have been preserved in the books that are named after them, and they're preserved for us in that written form, and their books are included in the canon of Scripture. The books of the writing prophets that we have in the Old Testament are commonly divided into the major prophets and the minor prophets. And the distinction between the major prophets and the minor prophets has nothing to do with their importance, but simply with the length of the books. So the major prophets are those longer books, Isaiah, Jeremiah, along with Lamentations, Ezekiel, and Daniel. The term minor prophets was used to refer to these shorter books, and it was a term that was known from the time of Augustine in the 4th to the 5th century AD, and it's used to refer to these 12 shorter books of prophecy, which are the final books in our Old Testament arrangement. So we have Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. And they are arranged really roughly in chronological order. The arrangement of the books in the Hebrew Bible, referred to as the Tanakh, is different to the arrangement that we find in the Bibles that we tend to use today. So in the Hebrew Bible, the first 5 books, or the Torah, the books of law, are the same arrangement as we have: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And these are then followed by the prophets, Nephiim, where there are 8 books, and these are divided into the former prophets, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. We separate Samuel into 1st and 2nd Samuel and Kings into 1st and 2nd Kings, but in the Hebrew Bible, though, they are each one book. And we tend to refer to these books as the historical books, but in the Hebrew Bible, they're under the division of the prophets. And then, so those are the former prophets, and then the latter prophets are Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the 12. And then the third section in the Hebrew Bible are the writings, the Ketuvim, and these are the other books, Psalms, Proverbs, Job, Song of Songs, Ruth, Lamentations, Ecclesiastes, Esther, Daniel, Ezra and Nehemiah, which are combined as one, and Chronicles. Again, we separate that into 1st and 2nd Chronicles, but it's just Chronicles in the Hebrew Bible. So all of the books are the same, but it's just that the arrangement is different in the Hebrew Bible to the arrangement we have in our Old Testaments. So in this arrangement, then, the 12 minor prophets are regarded as one book, and they could have been written on one scroll. And they're referred to as the Book of the 12 or the 12 prophets, and that's a term that's used by the writer of the apocryphal book Ecclesiasticus, which is also called the Wisdom of Sirach, and that dates from the 2nd century BC. And in that passage, Ecclesiasticus chapter 49, verse 10, the writer, in the context, he's writing, he's sort of reviewing the history of Israel and referring to activities of various kings and prophets. And in verse 10, he says, "May the bones of the 12 prophets send forth new life from where they lie, for they comforted the people of Jacob and delivered them with confident hope." So we see that at that time in the 2nd century BC, they were being referred to as the 12 prophets and being treated really as one book. But it's not known exactly when the 12 were gathered together into this one collection on one scroll. But it must have been after the writing of Malachi, which is the latest of the 12, and probably late in the Persian period. So from that sort of dates from 539 through to 332 BC. So at some point during that period, these 12 writings, which probably existed separately, are brought together into one collection and given this name of the 12. So the prophets who wrote these 12 books lived over a period of approximately 400 years, and they came from different backgrounds. They wrote with different purposes in mind, and the teachings of these prophets concerned social and religious conditions in Israel and Judah at the time of their writing. They involve a call for repentance for the people to return to Torah, return to the law. And they also wrote about conditions amongst the heathen nations of that day and the judgments that God was going to bring upon those heathen nations as well. They also wrote of the coming of the Messiah and the kingdom of the Messiah. So there's quite a variety of topics that the 12 are dealing with in their writings. The purpose of the prophetic writings is summarized well in Hosea chapter 14 and verse 9, which says, "Those who are wise understand these things. Those who are discerning know them. For the ways of the Lord are right, and the upright walk in them, but transgressors stumble in them." So these are not books that are just to be read once or twice, but they're to be read and read again and read again, and to be studied in order to understand them and in order to follow the way of the Lord for obedience as well. So that's the importance of these books, of understanding them and reading them and rereading them and going over them. And so over the next 12 weeks, then we shall be looking at 4 of these 12. We'll be looking at the books of Micah, and we'll start with an introduction to that this evening. We'll be looking at Nahum, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah as well. So we'll have a look for the rest of our time together. We'll have a look at an introduction to the book of Micah tonight. In our Bibles, following the Hebrew order of the 12, the book of Micah is the 6th of the 12 minor prophets. In the Septuagint, that's the Greek version of the Old Testament, it follows a different ordering, and in that version, Micah is the 3rd book of the 12. And we know very little personal details about the prophet Micah. His father's name is not given in the text. Some of the other prophets introduce themselves as so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, son of, and there's a sort of whole family history. But we have none of that with Micah. We don't know his father's name. He gives no family history. And no personal events from his life are recorded either. Again, some of the other prophets, we get a sense of their personal life through the things that they record as well, but very little of that here in the book of Micah. His name, Micah, is an abbreviated form of the name Micaiah, which means who is like Yahweh. And chapter 1, verse 1 of the book, he introduces himself by using that name. In 1 Kings chapter 22, verses 8 and 9, we have another prophet who's named Micaiah, who was working at the time of King Ahab of Israel, and we have his message there. He wasn't very popular with Ahab, if you read the passage there in 1 Kings chapter 22, but his name is Micaiah, so the longer form of the name there. And there are several other characters in the Old Testament of the same name as well, but we can't identify any of them with the prophet Micah here. He came from a place called Moresheth. Again, we learn this from the first verse of the book, Micah chapter 1 and verse 1, the word of the Lord that came to Micah of Moresheth. And Moresheth was a town in Judah near the Philistine city of Gath. It is called Moresheth Gath in Micah chapter 1 and verse 14, where it's mentioned again. So the inclusion of Gath in the name there would suggest that it's in close proximity to Gath. It's some 25 miles southwest of Jerusalem in the region known as the Shephelah, or the foothills of Judea, although its exact location is uncertain. Several sites have been suggested for its location, but there's nothing absolutely certain about where Moresheth was located, except this general, in this general direction and its closeness to the city of Gath. This was a rural region with fertile soil, so it was good for the growing of crops and trees such as olive trees. And if we look on the maps here, on the left-hand side, we can see the location of Gath there, just inside the yellow area of Philistia, just southwest there of Jerusalem. So Moresheth isn't marked on here, but it'd be close to the location of Gath there. And then on the right-hand map, you can see the natural regions of Canaan there, the coastal plain, and then going into the hill country. So the Shephelah is that sort of the foothills leading up to the hill country there. So that's the sort of region that Micah came from, where he lived. Micah worked during the reigns of 3 kings of Judah, again from the opening verse of the book, Micah chapter 1, verse 1. says, the word of the Lord that came to Micah of Moresheth in the days of kings Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah of Judah. So 3 kings of Judah mentioned there, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. So he was working at the same time as the prophet Isaiah, from Isaiah chapter 1 and verse 1. Isaiah opens his book here, the vision of Isaiah, son of Amos, which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. So Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah are the three kings mentioned by Micah. So Isaiah begins his work a little bit before Micah, probably. Also, Hosea is around the same time, as we see from the opening verse of his book as well. The word of the Lord that came to Hosea, son of Berai, in the days of kings Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah of Judah, and in the days of King Jeroboam, son of Joash of Israel. So again, the three kings mentioned by Micah there, mentioned by Hosea as well. But again, Hosea starting a little bit before Micah's time. And Micah really has much in common with Isaiah, and some of their words are almost identical, and we'll notice that as we go through the book. Micah's short as 20 years or as long as 55 years, depending at what point during that time he began and ended his ministry. Since none of Micah's messages are dated, we cannot be any more precise or specific than that. So there's general idea of around sort of 735 to 700 BC. And we don't know anything about the compilation of Micah's messages into one book. How were they brought together, or when were they brought together? Again, no information given about that. His message was known, and it was quoted from in the time of the prophet Jeremiah. Jeremiah, of course, is much later, around 100 years or so later, but in Jeremiah chapter 26, verses 16 to 19, there is reference here to Micah. This is at a time when Jeremiah is facing some trouble and the possibility of being put to death because people don't like his message. Jeremiah chapter 26, verse 16 says, Then the officials and all the people said to the priests and the prophets, This man, that's referring to Jeremiah, this man does not deserve the sentence of death, for he has spoken to us in the name of the Lord our God. And some of the elders of the land arose and said to all the assembled people, Micah of Moresheth, who prophesied during the days of King Hezekiah of Judah, said to all the people of Judah, Thus says the Lord of hosts, Zion shall be ploughed as a field, Jerusalem shall become a heap of ruins, and the mountain of the house a wooded height. So they're quoting there from Micah chapter 3 and verse 12. And the reason they're quoting it is to say, well, Micah was giving a similar message of destruction to come upon Judah as Jeremiah has been doing, and Micah wasn't put to death for what he was doing. So why should we put Jeremiah to death? But it's interesting to notice there that Micah's prophecy was known and was used by them at that time, the time of Jeremiah. Micah does not record the circumstances of his call from God to prophesy, as we find in some of the other prophets, such as Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel, Amos and Hosea. They tell us, well, this is how God called me, and they perhaps experienced some kind of vision from God. Micah simply speaks of his readiness to speak in chapter 3 and verse 8. He says, But as for me, I am filled with power, with the Spirit of the Lord, and with justice and might, to declare to Jacob his transgression and to Israel his sin. So Micah is saying there that he's ready to do this. He's filled with the Spirit of the Lord, and he is ready to go and declare to Jacob, to Israel, his transgression and sin. Micah's message received from the Lord, and which he saw, concerned Samaria and Jerusalem. Again, from chapter 1 and verse 1. To read the verse again, he says, "The word of the Lord that came to Micah of Moresheth in the days of kings Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah of Judah, which he saw concerning Samaria and Jerusalem." Samaria and Jerusalem, the capitals of the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. So Micah's ministry then began before the destruction of Samaria. Samaria was destroyed by the Assyrians in 721 BC, and he'll talk about that in chapter 1 of the book. So his ministry, we can say, began before then anyway. Micah's messages reflect the political, the social, and the religious conditions in Israel and Judah at that time. Like Amos, who worked a little before Micah's time, Micah is concerned about the oppression of the poor and the violence and the corruption of the political and religious leaders. And Micah announces God's coming judgment upon his people in Israel and Judah because of their unfaithfulness. But he also offers the hope of restoration and the prospect of the coming of the Messiah, mentioning the Messiah's birth in Bethlehem and the establishment of his kingdom of peace. So in Micah chapter 4, verses 1 to 4, and these verses are almost identical to a passage that we have in Isaiah chapter 2. He says, "In days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be raised up above the hills. People shall stream to it, and many nations shall come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth instruction, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between many peoples, and shall arbitrate between strong nations far away. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. But they shall all sit under their own vines and under their own fig trees, and no one shall make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken." So speaking here of the coming of the Messiah's kingdom and conditions in that kingdom, so offering some hope for the future. And then in chapter 5, verses 2 to 4, he says, "But you, O Bethlehem of Ephrathah, who are one of the little clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to rule in Israel, whose origin is from of old, from ancient days. Therefore he shall give them up until the time when she who is in labor has brought forth. Then the rest of his kindred shall return to the people of Israel, and he shall stand and feed his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God, and they shall live secure. For now he shall be great to the ends of the earth, and he shall be the one of peace." And of course, those words are quoted and fulfilled in the New Testament with the birth of Jesus in Bethlehem in Matthew chapter 2, verses 3 to 6, with the visit of the wise men to Herod in Jerusalem. They've come to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at his rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet. And here's the quote from Micah. And you, Bethlehem in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel. So this is the hope that Micah has. So it's not all about judgment and doom and gloom. There's this hope here in the book as well. So we'll have a look at the historical background to the book here, and first of all the political conditions of the time. King Uzziah, or Azariah as he's also called, reigned over Judah for a long time, between 792 to 740 BC, and he had brought great prosperity and stability and security to Judah. He'd extended the borders of Judah to the limits that had been established in the time of King Solomon. Although the Bible testifies that Uzziah did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, we're also told that the high places were not taken away, and the people continued to sacrifice and burn incense on the high places. So in 2 Kings chapter 15, verses 1 to 4, we have a summary of Uzziah's reign. 2 Kings chapter 15, verse 1 says, in the 27th year of King Jeroboam of Israel, King Azariah, Uzziah as he's called in Chronicles, King Azariah, son of Amaziah of Judah, began to reign. He was 16 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 52 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jechaliah of Jerusalem. He did what was right in the sight of the Lord, just as his father Amaziah had done. Nevertheless, the high places were not taken away. The people still sacrificed and made offerings on the high places. And it was in the year of King Uzziah's death that Isaiah saw that wonderful vision of the glory of God in the temple. And Isaiah began his work in Isaiah chapter 6, verse 1. So it must have been soon after this, the death of Uzziah, that Micah also began his work during the reign then of Uzziah's son, Jotham. Jotham is the first of the kings that Micah mentions there in chapter 1 and verse 1. So Jotham is Uzziah's son. And he also receives a favourable report in 2 Chronicles chapter 27. We have a beginning of the chapter here, a summary again of his reign. Told his son Jotham, Uzziah's son Jotham succeeded him. Jotham was 25 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jerusha, daughter of Zadok. He did what was right in the sight of the Lord. So a good king, just as his father Uzziah had done, only he did not invade the temple of the Lord. That's what Uzziah had done that and got into trouble for that. But we are told here that the people still followed corrupt practices. So Jotham was a good king, but the people still followed their corrupt practices. Again, to go back to 2 Kings as well, in the account there, 2 Kings 15, verses 34 and 35. Again, speaking of Jotham here, he did what was right in the sight of the Lord, just as his father Uzziah had done. Nevertheless, the high places were not removed. The people still sacrificed and made offerings on the high places. He built the upper gate of the house of the Lord. Conditions, though, deteriorated under the reign of Jotham's son Ahaz. And again, here we can read summary of his reign in 2 Kings chapter 16, verses 1 to 4 here. In the 17th year of Pekah, son of Remaliah, King Ahaz, son of Jotham, so here's the second king Micah mentions in verse 1. Ahaz, King Ahaz, son of Jotham of Judah, began to reign. Ahaz was 20 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. He did not do what was right in the sight of the Lord his God, as his ancestor David had done, but he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel. He even made his son pass through fire according to the abominable practices of the nations whom the Lord drove out before the people of Israel. He sacrificed and made offerings on the high places, on the hills, and under every green tree. Again, the account from Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, chapter 28, verses 1 to 4. Says Ahaz was 20 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. He did not do what was right in the sight of the Lord, as his ancestor David had done, but he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel. He even made cast images for the Baals, and he made offerings in the valley of the son of Hinnom, and made his sons pass through fire, according to the abominable practices of the nations whom the Lord drove out before the people of Israel. He sacrificed and made offerings on the high places, on the hills, and under every green tree. So even though his father Jotham had been a good king, and his father Uzziah had been a good king, Ahaz wasn't. So things deteriorated under Ahaz. And at that time, in the days of Ahaz, Judah was threatened by an alliance between the northern kingdom of Israel and Syria, because Ahaz would not join them in their rebellion against the Assyrians. The Assyrians are the rising power at this time, and northern kingdom of Israel and Syria formed an alliance to resist the Assyrians. They wanted Ahaz to join them, but he would not do so. So Ahaz appealed then to Assyria for help, a decision which proved costly for Ahaz, as Judah then became a tributary of Assyria. So 2 Kings chapter 16, from verse 5, tells us this part of the story. Then King Rezin of Aram, or Syria, and King Pekah, son of Remaliah of Israel, came up to wage war on Jerusalem. They besieged Ahaz, but could not conquer him. At that time, the king of Edom recovered Elath for Edom and drove the Judeans from Elath, and the Edomites came to Elath, where they live to this day. Ahaz sent messengers to King Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria, saying, I am your servant and your son. Come up and rescue me from the hand of the king of Aram and from the hand of the king of Israel, who are attacking me. Ahaz also took the silver and gold found in the house of the Lord and in the treasures of the king's house, and sent a present to the king of Assyria. The king of Assyria listened to him. The king of Assyria marched up against Damascus and took it, carrying its people captive to Kir. Then he killed Rezin. And then from the account in 2 Chronicles as well, chapter 28, from verse 16, at that time King Ahaz sent to the king of Assyria for help, for the Edomites had again invaded and defeated Judah and carried away captives, and the Philistines had made raids on the cities in the Shephelah and the Negeb of Judah, and had taken Bethshemesh, Aijalon, Gederoth, Succoth with its villages, Timnah with its villages, and Gimzo with its villages, and they settled there. For the Lord brought Judah low because of King Ahaz of Israel, for he had behaved without restraint in Judah and had been faithless to the Lord. So King Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria came against him and oppressed him instead of strengthening him. For Ahaz plundered the house of the Lord and the houses of the king and of the officials, and gave tribute to the king of Assyria, but it did not help him. So this was the trouble that Ahaz got himself into by going to the Assyrians for help. He had just ended up having to pay them money and tribute to them. And it was at this time, during this period, that the Assyrians finally came against Samaria, the capital of the northern kingdom, destroying it and taking the people away into captivity. Again, we can read of this in 2 Kings chapter 17, and the opening verses of the chapter give us this account. In the 12th year of King Ahaz of Judah, Hoshea, son of Elah, began to reign in Samaria over Israel. He reigned 9 years. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, yet not like the kings of Israel who were before him. King Shalmaneser of Assyria came up against him. Hoshea became his vassal and paid him tribute. But the king of Assyria found treachery in Hoshea, for he had sent messengers to King So of Egypt and offered no tribute to the king of Assyria, as he had done year by year. Therefore the king of Assyria confined him and imprisoned him. Then the king of Assyria invaded all the land and came to Samaria. For 3 years he besieged it. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria. He carried the Israelites away to Assyria, placed them in Halah, on the Habor, the river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes. So that was the end of Samaria in the northern kingdom, and that's something that Micah talks about in Micah chapter 1, as we'll see that next week. So Ahaz was then succeeded by his son Hezekiah, who proved to be completely different to Ahaz. Hezekiah proved to be one of the best kings of Judah. Again, to read of his reign in 2 Kings chapter 18, from verse 1. So in the 3rd year of King Hoshea, son of Elah of Israel, Hezekiah, son of King Ahaz of Judah, began to reign. He was 25 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Abi, daughter of Zechariah. He did what was right in the sight of the Lord, just as his ancestor David had done. He removed the high places, broke down the pillars, and cut down the sacred pole. He broke in pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made, for until those days the people of Israel had made offerings to it. It was called Nehushtan. He trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel, so that there was no one like him among all the kings of Judah after him, or among those who were before him. So Hezekiah, completely different character to Ahaz, a good king who introduces these reforms, religious reforms. So he repaired, he cleansed the temple, he consecrated the priests, he reinstituted the worship of the Lord, which had been so neglected during the reign of Ahaz. And we can read of all of the reforms. There's 3 chapters there in 2 Chronicles, chapters 29 to 31, which give an account of Hezekiah's reforms. Isaiah, prophet Isaiah, who's based in Jerusalem, had access to Hezekiah, was able to help him and advise him. Hezekiah turned to Isaiah for help and advice. But whether Hezekiah was also influenced by Micah's message, we don't know. We don't know if there was any connection between the two there. We're not told of any. But when Hezekiah rebelled against the Assyrian overlords, King Sennacherib of Assyria came west, and he laid siege to many of the cities in Judah, including Jerusalem. And he boasted of taking 46 cities of Judah, including the city of Lachish, which was close to Micah's hometown of Moresheth Gath. And so Micah may well have had first-hand experience of the devastation that was caused by the Assyrians to Judah. Again, to look on the map there, we can see the location of Lachish, just south of Gath there. Gath just in the yellow section of Philistia on the border there, and Lachish to the south. So the Assyrians came and took that city and many of, I'd say, 46 other cities. So this is the region where Micah is based. This is his home region. So no doubt he must have had some experience of what the Assyrians were capable of doing. And the map here shows the extent, the ultimate extent of the Assyrian Empire. So at the time of Micah, it's sort of in the early stages. Eventually, they go down into Egypt, but this Syria is really the dominant power at this time, and this is where the trouble is coming for Judah. Micah was working during a time of oppression, corruption, and injustice, as revealed in certain parts of his messages. So in chapter 2, verses 1 and 2, he writes there, "Alas for those who devise wickedness and evil deeds on their beds. When the morning dawns, they perform it, because it is in their power. They covet fields and seize them, houses and take them away. They oppress householder and house, people and their inheritance." And in verses 8 and 9, he says, "But you rise up against my people as an enemy. You strip the robe from the peaceful, from those who pass by trustingly with no thought of war. The women of my people you drive out from their pleasant houses. From their young children you take away my glory forever." So the wealthy are devising wicked plans. He pictures them there in their beds, working out their evil plans, and they do it just because they can do it. And in the morning they go off and they implement their plans, and they seize the land and the property that belongs to those who are weaker than themselves. And then in chapter 3, verses 1 to 3, we see here that the rulers were afflicting the people, acting unjustly, because they hate the good and they love the evil. He says here, and I said, "Listen, you heads of Jacob and rulers of the house of Israel, should you not know justice? You who hate the good and love the evil, who tear the skin off my people and the flesh off their bones, who eat the flesh of my people, flay their skin off them, break their bones in pieces and chop them up like meat in a kettle, like flesh in a cauldron." So we see again the leaders, the heads of Jacob, the leaders of the people, acting unjustly because they hate the good and they love the evil. And then in chapter 3, verses 9 to 11, he says, "Hear this, you rulers of the house of Jacob and chiefs of the house of Israel, who abhor justice and pervert all equity, who build Zion with blood and Jerusalem with wrong. Its rulers give judgment for a bribe, its priests teach for a price, its prophets give oracles for money. Yet you lean upon the Lord and say, surely the Lord is with us. No harm shall come upon us." So the judges are accepting bribes, and the priests and the prophets are working for personal gain. And in chapter 7, verses 2 and 3, he says this, "The faithful have disappeared from the land, and there is no one left who is upright. They all lie in wait for blood, and they hunt each other with nets. Their hands are skilled to do evil. The official and the judge ask for a bribe, and the powerful dictate what they desire. Thus they pervert justice." And then in chapter 6, verses 11 and 12, we see the corrupt business practices and violence that is common. In chapter 6, verses 11 and 12. "Can I tolerate wicked scales and a bag of dishonest weights? Your wealthy are full of violence. Your inhabitants speak lies with tongues of deceit in their mouths." So these are the social conditions that Micah is dealing with at this time. It's a time of oppression. It's a time of violence and corruption and injustice. And Micah is there to expose all that is going on. And then concerning the religious conditions, and we've really sort of touched on this already in looking at the reigns of those various kings. Jotham had been a good king, following the Lord, but the high places remained and the people continued to worship the false gods. Things had deteriorated further under King Ahaz, who completely turned away from the Lord. And when Hezekiah came to the throne, he tried to bring the people back to the true worship of the Lord through his religious reforms. But they were really superficial and they didn't change the hearts of the people. And simply going through the motions, going through the right religious actions was not what God wanted. God wanted a change of heart, a change of behavior towards others, and a change of relationship with him. And what God desires is summarized by Micah in chapter 6, verses 6 to 8. And these are perhaps amongst the best known of the words of Micah, and certainly provide a summary, really, of his whole message. He says here, "With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God?" So what does God want? Does he want thousands of offerings, calves and rams? And does he want these rivers of oil as offerings? What he really wants, Micah says, is that you should do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. And if the people will do that, then they will have that right relationship with God. So that's the background, really, to the book of Micah, and we'll be looking in detail at the text. We'll start with that next week. But here's a brief outline of the book that we will be following during these studies. In the first section, chapter 1, we have God's sentence of judgment to come upon Samaria and Jerusalem. In chapters 2 and 3, we have the sins of the leaders being exposed. In chapters 4 and 5, we have the ultimate triumph of God's people. That's where we read those passages concerning the kingdom and the coming of the Messiah from that section. And then in chapter 6, God's controversy with his people. And then the final chapter, there is a promise of hope there in chapter 7. So next week, then we'll be looking at Micah chapter 1. So if you want to read that in the meantime before next week, or read through the whole book as well, if you encourage you to do that. It's not that long. It won't take you that long to read through it, and then that'll give you a sense of the whole message there if you're able to do that. So we shall stop here